So we're starting the recording, and so we can begin with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then I'll start with a salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to him, the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. Okay, so good morning, everybody. So this is the second in-person class that we're having. We have a small group here in the library of Zhuangyan Monastery, and we have a larger group, much larger group, coming in online. Okay, so we'll be continuing our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, and I'm going to, I must have closed that file. Okay, let me open it. Okay, let me share the screen. How is the size now?
Yes, Bhante, it's good.
Good.
Oh, okay. Let me move this out of the way. Okay. Okay, now we come to 2 suttas which have the title Warriors. And I was a little bit hesitant, during the week whether I should use this material in the class, because looking at these 2 suttas from a contemporary perspective, one might even consider them to be a bit sexist in their flavor. But I think we should look at them anyway, and then you form your own judgment about them. Okay, so the theme of these suttas is going to be comparing the meditative monk to a warrior, and a warrior in a battle. And the battle is going to be the battle against sexual temptation, the battle to overcome the sensual lust, which will pull him away from the monastic life to disrobe and to return to the lay life. It's not really a battle of the monk against the woman, but from this perspective, the woman is seen as a temptation that the monk has to resist. And here it seems to me, and I'm not an expert on gender psychology, but there is, I think according to some research, a difference in the way, say, males perceive females and females perceive males, in that it's easier for a male to become inflamed with sexual desire by seeing an attractive female. That will happen more frequently than the female will be overcome and inflamed by sexual desire by seeing an attractive male. Of course, it works both ways. It's not that it's one-sided as against the other, but probably looking at this from the standpoint of evolutionary psychology, again, which I don't know too much about, but I've just heard a little bit, the task of the male in the evolutionary scheme is to spread his genes as widely as possible to ensure that those genes will continue into the future, will reproduce into the future. And so the male tends to look for a multiplicity of female partners and is easily inflamed by sexual desire in order to motivate him to find a partner to send out his seed to ensure that the genes reproduce and pass on to later generations. Whereas the female is more concerned, since biologically she is conditioned to bring up the baby and the infant and to nurture the infant. So her tendency is to look for a single stable partner, one who can ensure support for the upbringing of the child. And so her tendency is not to look so much just for a beautiful, attractive, or handsome, attractive partner for a temporary fling, but I'm sure that happens, but to look for a partner who has more the qualities that suggest that he will make a stable partner, that he'll take on the responsibility, the commitment to the woman, and to ensure that he helps the woman to look after the baby and the child and the youth in order to help that child grow up and become a stable person in the future. Does that seem to be correct? Okay, so I get some nods here. Okay, so the way it works in the monastic life, and particularly we have to remember that even in the Buddha's time, it's not the case, we read about the Buddha having all of these great disciples, Sariputta, Moggallana, Mahakashyapa, Anuruddha, and so on, who quickly became arahats with very little effort. And we see in these idealized pictures of the Buddha surrounded by a sangha of monks, sometimes nuns as well, with their eyes downcast, looking very peaceful, serene, self-contained, inwardly composed. But in actual fact, there were many youths who went forth into the Buddha's sangha, the Buddha's community, in their, even starting with novice ordination in their teenage years, then becoming fully ordained monks when they're at the age of 20. So you have large numbers of monks who are in their early 20s, and then they go on alms rounds every day, or at least in many cases they do. And when going on alms rounds, they'll be usually the ones who prepare the alms food and come out to offer it to the monks will be the women of the home. And when the woman comes out, often she'll be accompanied by her young teenage daughter, maybe 16, 17, 18 years old, maybe very beautiful and attractive, and you have the monk who might be 21, 22. And so eye contact takes place, and sometimes the woman will flash a very nice smile, the young girl will flash a nice smile, and it makes a strong impression on the young monk. And so there's a tendency for the images, the impressions for the young monk to take those back with him when he goes back to the monastery, and for them to simmer in the back of his mind. And so that can lead in many cases to the young monks at least having the desire to disrobe and to return to the lay life. And so in my experience in Sri Lanka, during the years I was in Sri Lanka, there would be like wave after wave of Westerners coming to Sri Lanka to ordain as monks. So I might have seen in my time in Sri Lanka like approximately 50 Western monks or Westerners come to Sri Lanka to become ordained as monks, and only a relatively small percentage of them continue to remain as monks. So it's not only sexual desire that leads them to this road, but there are many other conditioning factors. A different country where they're separated from their fellow countrymen, different climate, different food, different culture, and so on. Yeah, but comparatively, relatively, one hears of women who ordain as nuns, the numbers who disrobe are much smaller in proportion to that of the monks. So it seems that women who ordain have stronger staying power in the monastic life than monks do. Okay, so that is by way of a kind of preamble, but let's now look at the sutta. Can you see it from the seats? Okay, so now we have first the Buddha is going to set up the analogy, the simile. So 5 kinds of warriors found in the world. And what I find interesting, of course, that the Buddha came from the Sakyan clan, which was a Kshatriya family. So the Kshatriyas were sometimes it's rendered the warriors of the Indian caste system. But it seems from what the accounts that we read in the canon, even in the traditional stories, the narrative stories, one doesn't read very often about the Shakyas being actually involved in warfare. So it seems the Buddha, before his enlightenment as a young Kshatriya, he must have been trained in the methods of warfare. But the sutta shows a very keen understanding of the different stages or experiences that a warrior will undergo on the battlefield. Okay, so first case, we have a warrior who sees as the troops are congregating on both sides of the battlefield. So they come riding up in horses and in elephants, infantry all gathering, and then clouds of dust fly up into the air. And so we have some warrior who sees the cloud of dust, and then he gets filled with fear. And then the text says he sings founders. He doesn't brace himself, encourage himself to get into the battle. And he becomes afraid to enter the battle. So that's the first kind of warrior found in the world, the one who shrinks away from the battle. Okay, the second kind of warrior is able to endure the clouds of dust when all of the troops are gathering. He sees the dust fly up, but that doesn't scare him. But then maybe he sees some troops come carrying their standards, they're like poles with the insignia of the particular clans that they represent, showing that they're really getting serious about getting ready for battle. And then he becomes filled with fear and he can't brace himself and he's too afraid to enter the battle. So that's the second kind of warrior found in the world. Okay, then we have the third kind of warrior. So he sees the clouds of dust, that doesn't frighten him. He sees the crests of the standards, that doesn't frighten him. But then he hears the uproar, maybe as the troops have gathered, as the battle is about to begin. Some of the troops will have the conch shells and the trumpets signaling the battle is about to begin. And when he hears those sounds, then he founders and becomes full of fear and cannot enter the battle. So that's the third kind of warrior found in the world. Okay, so then we have the fourth kind of warrior who, even though he sees the clouds of dust, the crests of standards, he hears the uproar, but he's still not intimidated. He enters the battlefield, but then he's struck down and wounded by blows. So that's the fourth kind of warrior found in the world. And then we have the fifth kind of warrior, the one who endures all of this, even if he is beaten, struck by blows, and even if he falls down, he gets up, continues to fight until he triumphs in the battle. So this is the one who emerges victorious and stands at the head of the battlefield. So that's the fifth kind of warrior found in the world. So those are the 5 kinds of warriors. Okay, so now we have 5 kinds of persons, actually indicating monks, who are similar to warriors found among the monks. Okay, so what are the 5? Okay, so first we have a monk who said, sees the clouds of dust, and then he founders and he can't maintain the brahmacharya, the spiritual life, the life of renunciation. And then he discloses his weakness in the training, gives up the training, and reverts to the lower life. Actually, I put the Pali in the wrong place. Let me see if I can reposition it. Okay, so this is the prescribed method if a monk wants to disrobe. The method is that one discloses one's weakness in the training. In other words, one's inability to follow the training of, particularly the training in celibacy, to follow this complete training. It doesn't mean that one gives up the practice of the Dhamma completely, but one admits to one's fellow monk, usually to one's fellow monks, that one is unable to continue with the brahmacharya, the life of celibacy, the life of renunciation. And then one formally gives up the training. One makes a statement saying, I hereby give up the monastic life. I give up the rules of the monastic life. And then it says that one, here it's translated, one reverts to the lower life. The Pali expression here is hinaya avatati. And this word hina is, is the same word that the Mahayanists used when they were criticizing the older schools of Buddhism, or certain forms of Buddhism that emphasize the Arahat ideal. When they call them Hinayana, it's usually translated small vehicle or little vehicle, but that's a rather polite or politically correct translation. The actual literal translation is the inferior or low vehicle. Okay, but what I have to say, a little bit of my own qualification for this. Speaking honestly, there are many lay people who follow the Dhamma in much more admirable, more commendable, more sincere, more dedicated ways than many monastics. But at the same time, one has to say that the Buddha did lay down the monastic training, not just as a formal kind of monasticism, living in a monastery and following certain rules, but as a way of disciplining oneself and training oneself to advance to the higher stages of samadhi and insight in order to eradicate the fetters and bonds and defilements and to gain the ultimate goal of the Dhamma, the state of liberation. Okay, so if a monastic, and usually it's a monk, feels that he can't continue with the training, then the correct, even the necessary procedure is to declare to somebody. Formally, it doesn't have to be another monk, but that's the way it's usually done. Usually they'll conduct a little ceremony, bringing the Sangha together in the main gathering hall, and then the person, the monk who's going to leave the monastic life, will then declare to the other monks that he's unable to continue. He'll retreat to another little room where he'll change his monastic garb usually for white clothes. Then he'll come out again, give the robes back to the senior monk, and then the senior monk will confer on him the 5 precepts of a lay follower. So that is the proper way of giving up the training and returning to the lay life. Okay, so this is a monk who when he sees the cloud of dust cannot continue in the monastic life, but he decides to give up the training and return to the lay life. And so here, what is the cloud of dust? Okay, so here the monk hears, and in such and such a village or town, there are women or girls who are beautiful, attractive, graceful, possessing supreme beauty of complexion. Okay, this has to be a really strange monk who, when he hears this, then he sinks founders, he doesn't brace himself, and besides, he can't maintain the monastic life, and then he discloses his weakness and so on, and goes back to the household life. So that is the cloud of dust in that case. Yeah, I say this is very strange because I've never heard of a case who somebody just hears that there are beautiful women living in such and such a place, and then his mind gets so roiled by sensual desire that he decides, I can't continue anymore, and he gives it up. Yeah, usually at minimum it requires at least the sense of sight, the function of the sense of sight. And that's what we come across in case number 2. Okay, so here we have the monk who can endure the cloud of dust, but when he sees the crest of the standards, then he can't maintain the spiritual life. And then following the correct procedure, he gives up the monastic training and returns to the lay life. So what are the crests of the standards in this case? So it's not hearing the report about the beautiful girls and women, but he himself sees a woman or a girl who's beautiful, attractive, and so on. And then when he sees her, then his heart is shaken by desire. He sinks, he can't brace himself, and then he decides he can't continue in the monastic life, and then he gives up the training. Yeah, again, this is, in my experience, it's not really all that common. It might occur. Certainly, it's much more common than simply hearing reports about beautiful women. But the usual case, maybe it's the next one. Let me just check the third one. Not quite like that. Oh, we'll go on to the third one, then I'll take the more usual case. Okay, so the second case is that of seeing the beautiful, attractive woman or girl. Again, we have the young monk on alms round. The girl smiles at him, and then he's so distressed that he gives up the training. Now, just as I was saying this, I was just thinking of a case that I came across that I read in the biography of Ajahn Mun. Ajahn Mun was he was the Thai meditation master who helped to revive the Dutanga tradition in Thailand earlier in the 20th century. And he was a very diligent, very fierce meditator who, according to reports, he attained arhatship along with various psychic powers, and he gathered large followings in northeast Thailand. And so many of the contemporary Thai meditation masters in the forest tradition are descendants in the lineage of Ajahn Mun, including Ajahn Chah was not in the direct descent from Ajahn Mun, but he had one meeting with Ajahn Mun, which deeply inspired him. But Ajahn Mahabor and other teachers, I don't know all of the names, were in the lineage, some of them direct disciples of Ajahn Mun, others in the lineage descending from Ajahn Mun. But in the biography of Ajahn Mun, a case is mentioned where there was a young monk who was a disciple of Ajahn Mun, and he was going on alms round. He seemed to have been very sincere, very diligent, very dedicated, but he was going on alms round, and a young girl came out to offer alms, and he looked up at her, and she looked at him. Their eyes met, and it was like electricity went through his body. And so he went back after gathering alms, he went back to the monastery, went into his kuti, lay down on his bed, just overwhelmed by desire. And he came to Ajahn Mun, or maybe Ajahn Mun knew what was going on through his psychic power, called him and talked to him and taught him to do the meditation on the 32 parts of the body. The monk practiced that. Still, he couldn't get that girl out of his mind. Ajahn Mun told him, in the future, you don't go on your alms round, you don't go to that village, you go to other villages. He followed, still couldn't get the girl out of his mind. Ajahn Mun told him, okay, you do the recollection of the Buddha, dedicating yourself again and again to the Buddha. He tried that over and over, still couldn't succeed. Always thinking of that girl, wanted to go back to her. So Ajahn Mun thought, okay, I can't deal with this monk here while he's staying here. He's always wanting to go back to the house of that girl. So Ajahn Mun sent him to another monastery in a village far away. And of course, the monk was very reluctant to go there. But Ajahn Mun, as I said, he could be very fierce. He said, you go there. So the monk packed up his things, went to the other village, maybe 50 miles away, which is quite a distance in Thailand in early 20th century when there's no cars available or easily available. So the monk goes there, he's living in the other village. Everything is going very well, he's peaceful, calm. He's put the girl out of his mind, at least for the most part. And then what happens? What do you think happens? If you've read the book and you remember it, then don't. The
girl moves to his village.
Oh, you must have read the book.
No, I didn't. I just guessed.
Oh, wow, that's a very good guess. Exactly. The girl's family moved to that village. And so then when the monk was going on his alms round, he comes to a house waiting for the people to come out. He looks up, and who comes out of the door with a tray of alms food? Wow, that same girl. And then he was lost. And then I think he came back to Ajahn. No, I don't. The rest of the story is not so fresh in my mind. But somehow Ajahn Mun realized that there must be a karmic connection between those two, that because of the karmic connection, sort of the karma operating in the back, the hidden karma working in the background, pull the strings so that for some reason that girl's family was to move to that village 50 miles away where the young monk had relocated. And so they came together, and then the young monk couldn't endure, and he was like the warrior defeated in battle. Okay, so this is the...
So what happened in the end, Bhante? Did he leave?
Yeah, that's what I said. He couldn't continue.
Okay.
Now he was sort of out of the reach of Ajahn Mun. And when Ajahn Mun heard about this, he realized that there was just too strong a karmic connection between them. And so there was nothing that could be done, no remedy for it, that it was their karmic destiny to come together again as man and wife. Yeah, sometimes there's a concept that appears in the commentaries. It's, I don't remember the Pali expression, but in English it would be translated something as your merit partner of 500 past births, which means it often happens that it'll be like a husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend who are devout Buddhists, and then they do meritorious deeds together. And then, they'll make, if they're married, they'll often invite the Sangha, even if they're during the time of Buddha, invite the Buddha and the Sangha together to make alms offerings or make offerings of robes to the Sangha and so on. So they do many meritorious deeds together. And then over life after life, they always come together because of their karmic connection. They do meritorious deeds. And then in one life, usually it's the male, through the working of karma, he'll go forth as a monk. And so the commentaries say that he has to be very careful if he meets his merit partner from the 500 past births, because they have the strong karmic connection. So that could be the case with that young monk who was the disciple of Ajahn Mun. The woman could have been his merit partner from many past births. So though he goes forth as a monk, and now she's living as a householder, as in a family of devotees supporting Ajahn Mun. But when the young monk comes together with that woman, then their connection from many past births gets activated, sort of stimulated, and then they come together. Okay, so this is the second type of warrior. Okay, now we come to the third type of warrior. So this is analogous to the one who shakes, trembles, and leaves the battlefield when he hears the uproar. And so this is a monk who hears the uproar and then gives up the monastic training. So what is the uproar in this case? In his case, okay, so here the monk has gone to the forest and so on, to an empty hut. And then a woman approaches him, smiles at him, chats with him, laughs at him, and teases him. And as he is doing so, then he sinks, founders, can't maintain, and doesn't brace himself, and he can't maintain the spiritual life. And then he gives up the training and reverts to the household life. Yeah, this, again, I say that this is, or at least it's relatively rare, that just from one encounter, that actually it would be very rare for a woman to come up to a monk who's sitting, at least in the traditional Buddhist country, a monk who might be sitting at the foot of a tree or an empty cell, sitting in meditation, What more often happens is that, say, at a monastery in the evening, usually when there is like a ceremony going on or a puja, like a worship service and so on, like before the service or after the service, the group of women will come to the room of the monk, or sometimes if it's like in Sri Lanka, a warm country where they're meeting outside in the terrace around the Bodhi tree, then they'll chat and there'll be exchange of smiles, laughter, telling jokes, and so on. And maybe even the women will tease the monk in a friendly way, a little bit, not with a harmless intent, but all of this leads to the development of a sense of closeness and intimacy between the younger monk and the young women out on the Bodhi tree terrace, or the terrace of the Chaitya, the Dagaba. And then through that close connection, repeated contact, then the sensual desire starts to build up in the mind of the monk, and then he can't maintain the life of renunciation, and then it'll give up the training and go back to the household life. Yeah, what strikes me is that, okay, I'm thinking of the cases of monks, Western monks in Sri Lanka who disrobed and who then came to speak to me and to tell me about the reason why they wanted to disrobe. It isn't so much that they're filled with kind of obsessive, compulsive, overwhelming sensual desire, but what they start to feel is that they feel the need to have a relationship, a personal relationship. And in that case, it's not, as I said, obsessive, compelling sexual desire, but it's a need to have some kind of more personal, intimate, close connection with, usually it's a male with a female. And usually that is one of the major reasons for them to disrobe. You know, when monks have come to me and told me that, then I understand that. And I say, I could understand this. And I don't try to discourage them from, well, maybe sometimes I discourage them a little, but if they persist, then I will say, I understand, and then we don't see them anymore. Maybe a month later, I'll get a letter from them from France or Germany or England or Australia with a different name. You might have remembered me as Bhikkhu so-and-so. Okay, now we have the fourth case. And this is an extremely rare case, but must have occurred during the Buddha's time. Okay, so this is the case of the monk who endures all of the other challenges, but he is struck down and wounded by a blow. So what is the blow? Okay, here we have the monk who's gone to the forest and so on. Then a woman approaches him, sits down or lies down next to him, and embraces him. And when she does so, then he has sexual intercourse with her without having given up the training and disclosed his weakness. Like this is the first, this kind of case. I mean, I've never heard of anything like this happening. It's just, if it did happen, it must have been so rare, but it's possible in the Buddha's time. We have to remember that the Buddha was not teaching in a traditional Buddhist country. Northeast India was not, though there were large Buddhist populations through the Buddha's teaching influence, but the dominant population was not the Buddhists. They would have been followers of maybe watered down forms of Brahmanism. We can't even call it Hinduism, because Hinduism, as we know it, is a later development, an amalgamation of different strains of Indian religious forms into one very complex composite that we call Hinduism. But there would have been different forms of probably largely theistic devotional religions, religions based on the worship of local deities with an overlay of Brahmanism. And then many people just didn't follow any kind of religious form. And so you could see a woman coming without any close Buddhist connections, and maybe she thinks it's one of her tasks is to try to tempt the ascetics, to pull them away from their life of renunciation. And so she comes out and tempts him. Probably they start with a little chit-chat, and then she cajoles him into having sexual relations with her. And then this is the important phrase, actually, that the monk hasn't formally given up the training and disclosed his weakness. So in this state, he still is bearing the status of a bhikkhu, and yet he's breaking the rule of celibacy, which is one of the fundamental rules of the monastic life. It's one of the four, it's called the four parajikas, the parajikas of the offenses that if one violates one of them, one loses one's status as a bhikkhu, as a fully ordained monk. So that is committing sexual intercourse, whether heterosexual, homosexual, even with an animal, any of those, one loses the status of monk. The second is stealing an item of such value that one would incur some kind of criminal penalty on account of the act of theft. The third is killing a human being or in some way contributing to the killing, directly contributing to the killing of a human being. And the fourth is falsely making claims to supernormal powers or superior attainments. Okay, so in this case, the monk is violating the first of those parajikas, and so he loses his status as a monk. In that case, he is defeated as a monk. Okay, so that's the fourth kind of person. That's the one who's struck down and wounded by a blow. Actually, from the monastic perspective, one would say he's actually been killed because he's lost his status as a monk. And once you commit this act, you can't take full ordination again. So you can continue or you can reordain as a samanera, that is, as a novice monk, and continue as a novice monk. Yeah, I know a few cases in Sri Lanka of monks who did commit the parajika, the defeat offense. Just like one time, they were just overwhelmed by sudden temptation. And so, but they deeply regretted it later. They really wanted to live their full life as a monk. And so they took the ordination as samanera, as a novice monk, and they continued to be very good monks as samaneras. Okay, now we come to the fifth monk who's compared to a warrior. So this is the one who triumphs in the battle. Again, it's not the battle of the monk against the women, but it's a battle of the monk inwardly within himself against the sensual desire. So the monk who triumphs in the battle emerges victorious and stands at the head of the battlefield. So what is the victory? Okay, so here the monk has gone to the forest, and the woman comes to him and sits down near him and embraces him. This seems a little bit, maybe it does have a little bit of a misogynist flavor. So he disentangles himself. I'm not going to submit to that temptation. Frees himself and goes off like a bird wherever he wants. Then the rest is sort of the standard passage on the sequential training. He goes to a secluded place. He overcomes the 5 hindrances. He attains the 4 jhanas. And then with his mind concentrated, he directs it to the destruction of the asavas. He penetrates the 4 Noble Truths, and he reaches the destruction of the asavas, and he understands that he has gained the end of birth and death. So that's his victory in battle. And so this is the person who endures all of the other challenges in the battle of the spiritual life, and then emerges victorious and stands at the head of the battlefield. Okay, so those are the 5 kinds of persons similar to warriors. So what do you think? Does the sutta seem misogynist? You do think so?
Yes. Well, yes. I mean, you have male and generally it's men who are coming on to women in one sex. I've never, the idea of a woman going up to a man and saying, let's have sex, it's just a male fantasy, I mean, I'm sure it happens.
Yeah.
But
Do we I think we do have the microphone here. Maybe, okay, Jason? Because I think the people online can't hear.
well, it does kind of read as a male fantasy. These women who are overly desirous, this poor monk who just can't fight off the affections of these amorous women. It's interesting to me that it's.
Wait, let me just ask, do the people online hear?
Yes, Bhante, but it's not very clear.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Could you speak slower because there's echo?
Okay.
Okay, speak.
It's also it's interesting that that this is couched in terms of like war.
Yeah.
That to me is a little concerning.
Yeah.
I understand it in a colloquial sense, but being at war with these human feelings, and then by proxy being at war with women as those who bring out these feelings, is, I would say, misogynist, but also misplaced in a way, I think. And I'm not sure how else to put it. But I think as a woman who's used to translating male thoughts so that they apply to me, I guess it's interesting to look at it as how we deal with any type of seductive temptation. Because I often think I don't have these extreme urges that most men do, but I do have temptations like to overeat or things of that nature. And in that way, I can relate to the sutta, which I know it's not meant that way. But I would say it's misogyny.
And also when you were speaking, what a thought that occurred to me, and this is not referring to monastic life, but just in general life and society, when we think about the relations between the sexes, like what percentage, say, of pornography is directed at women? Like, what percentage of subscribers to, say, pornography on the internet? What percentage are males? What percentage are females? Like, what is it? 99.9% probably male, maybe 0.1%, if that much, female. In rape cases, what percentage of those who commit rape are males raping females? What percentage of those who commit rape are females raping males? other things, pornography, rape.
Molestation of children.
Say again?
Molestation of children.
Molestation of children. Yeah, that had just a thought just occurred to me just before you spoke. Yeah, this, I think they call it child pornography, or actually in physical, yeah, real physical molestation. Usually it's the uncle molesting his little, maybe 12-year-old or 10-year-old niece, not so much the aunt molesting her 10 or 12-year-old nephew. Okay, I see some other some hands raised. Let's get some people on the internet. So Helen.
Yeah,
Okay, speak.
thank you. Thank you for your work on this. The problem I'm having with it is just it's so silly.
I just want to, do the people hear her voice? You could, okay, they could hear. I think
You know,
if I take the microphone, I put it near the computer.
should I talk?
We're going to put the microphone. Okay, you can talk now.
Okay. The problem I'm having is that it seems so silly. Like, it's hard for me to believe that back in the Buddha's day, men would react so quickly to, and then as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, maybe, but I'm also wondering if he meant it more metaphorically, if the whole thing is really more about temptation of any kind, and that there are ways, sometimes we can very quickly succumb, or sometimes it takes longer to succumb. Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's meant to be taken literally.
I think in this case, it's meant to be taken literally. Yeah, but I say it's a bit stereotyping. Well, caricature. It's a bit of a caricature of what happens, because it, as I said, I've never heard of it happening where a monk hears a report about beautiful women and then decides, I'm going to disrobe. And very seldom does it happen if a monk sees a beautiful woman and then thinks, oh, I'm going to disrobe because of that. More often it happens, say, if a monk has sustained contact particularly with a particular woman, and then they develop sort of close feelings for each other. And then the monk decides that he wants to have a sustained, personal relationship with that woman, and then he'll disrobe.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this way, it's a bit of a caricature to display it as occurring so quickly, and then also the way depicting the woman as the seductress who doesn't even use subtle techniques of seduction, but just wraps her body around the meditating monk. Yeah, I think that there are images like this and stories like this that come down in some of the Hindu narrative literature as well. We have the rishi, or the ascetic, the tapasi, meditating in the Himalayan mountains or the foothills of the Himalayas. And then often it's a goddess coming down and taking human form in order to tempt the rishi or the tapasi to give up his ascetic life and return to the household life. Okay, Gita.
Thank you, Bhante, for teaching all of us the sutta and sharing this. I had a question for you. Bhante, when a monastic disrobes, how is he treated by his fellow monastics? Like, because it's considered a lower life to go back into a mundane, life with ordinary people. So do they get like ostracized? I mean, they're still in Buddhism and practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, and up to the third path and fruit, we can reach that as a lay person practicing. So
Yeah.
that's why I was thinking, do they get like kind of disband from the Mahasangha because they fell in love and it's a human emotion? That would be very cruel.
Yeah, no, that doesn't happen. What I heard, this was in my early days in Sri Lanka, this would be in the early 1970s. What I was told, this is referring to Sinhalese society, that if a man gives up the monastic life, becomes a layman, and then returns to his family, he is, I wouldn't say ostracized, but treated, people keep a bit of a distance from him, and they tend to look down at him. But after a few months, that wears off, and then he's sort of fully accepted back into the community. But that was in the 1970s. By the 1990s, the attitudes had changed a lot, and a kind of disdain for somebody who disrobes, that had stopped, and people who disrobe are welcome back. But within the monastic community, if somebody disrobes, the other monks don't ostracize him at all, but they understand, and they treat him, just continue to treat him as a friend.
Great. Thank you, Bhante. That's great.
Okay, Yudi?
Yes. Hi, Bhante. I'm probably missing the point here, but I honestly don't see that the sutta or whatever is being, misogynist. I don't see that, because I think the Buddha is trying to point out the different types of events, and I don't see it as being misogynist or anything like that. I think that it's a battle with the mind and the craving for desires, and he's just pointing out different things, different type of people that these events can occur. Maybe a woman is going to come up and seduce a guy. Maybe the guy is just going to see, the woman and just fall in love. It has nothing to do with the woman being.
I mean, I agree with that. That's the point that I made, that it's not sort of pitting the monk in a battle against the woman in a sense.
Yeah.
But I'd say that there is a bit of, I would maybe say, explicit or full-fledged misogyny there. But there's a little bit of a, at least in some portions, caricature of the woman, especially the last one, where she wraps herself around the monk and then almost forces him to have sexual.
But that's okay, because that happens in real life. That can happen in real life. And we have to accept that these are, things like that can happen. And why can the Buddha speak about situations like that actually can happen in real life? So it doesn't mean that, I'm glad that the Buddha is able to, he's ruthless in speaking out the truth. We have to, as women, we have to also understand, that, we do certain things like that too as well. So it's not a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal, for the monks, but, but it happens in real life.
Yeah, that is so, yeah. Okay, we have to move on. I see that there's quite a lot of questions. So we go to Yorong.
Yes, Bhante. My question is about the parajikas. It may seem unrelated to the discussion here, but I think it may be related. I'm curious why, for a householder, for our 5 precepts, not killing is number 1, not stealing is number 2, and then not having sexual misconduct is number 3. But for the monastic, I can understand why not having sexual intercourse is number 1, because I can see that is essential, a very strong sensual desire, and is a great obstacle to meditation. But why is killing coming after stealing? Is stealing, the desire to steal is also considered a stronger desire than that, which is an obstacle to meditation, than the act of killing? This is my curiosity.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer offhand, but it's possible. No, I was going to suggest that it's possible that the Parajikas will lay down in a temporal sequence. You see, the Buddha didn't formulate the rules sort of right off the bat when he started the monastic order, but it seems that there were certain rules or certain standards of behavior that were expected of monastics that were not formulated in the form of rules. But then when monastics violated those standards of behavior, and then in many cases complaints from the laity came to the Buddha, or complaints from other monks came to the Buddha, then the Buddha formulated the rule. So it's possible that the violation of sexual misconduct came first and was the first parajika laid down by the Buddha. And then a case where a monk was involved in killing came at a later time. And so that became the third parajika. Yeah, that's just a hypothesis, but I don't really know for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dora?
Yes, Bhante, thank you. I wanted to make 2 points to ask if you agree, and then the third one is a question. And the asymmetry that you were talking about regarding where porn is directed, for example, I see that as something that has existed for all of history, a result of conditioning, of evolution and culture, and of sexism and oppression of women that has existed probably for the entire history of humanity. That's the first point. The second point is that in recent years, this seems to be changing in many ways towards more equality. Even though we're not there yet, there is a change.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you agree with those 2 points. And the third point is a question: how does this change, if you agree, affect the institution and the tradition of the Buddhist religion? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just answer the third question. Like one way in which there's been a big change in attitude, or the way a change in attitude has affected the Buddhist religion or Buddhist institutions. You know, the Bhikkhuni Sangha, that's the order of fully ordained nuns in the Theravada tradition, had died out, maybe it was the 11th century, due to a number of circumstances, the decline of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, invasions from South India, and there was a predominant belief through the centuries that it's not possible to revive, that there's no means, no mechanism to revive the order of bhikkhunis, because this gets rather complicated, and I just have a few minutes, but let me just put it very briefly that in the late 20th century, a mechanism, at least amongst a number of progressive thinking monks, mechanisms to revive the Bhikkhuni Sangha were discovered, or new interpretations were developed to make it possible to ordain bhikkhunis. And so there started, maybe 1996, 97, 98, the ordination of women as bhikkhunis, initially women from Sri Lanka, and then from other countries. And so now, in at least Sri Lanka, there's a fairly substantial community of Bhikkhuni Sangha, perhaps about 1,000, maybe more than 1,000 women who have taken the full ordination as bhikkhunis. In Thailand, there are small numbers of women who have been ordained as bhikkhunis. And in the West, at least in the United States, and Australia, there are communities of bhikkhunis, and they're largely accepted by many Sri Lankan monks. It's much fewer in Thailand and almost not at all in Burma, or very few in Burma. Yeah, so that's, I think, shows the impact of a change in attitude in contemporary times. Okay, I'm going to have to move quickly because we just have a few minutes. So Chita Subha.
Thank you, Bhante. I will be quick as well. I really, really appreciate you um, examining the sutta and raising an issue that there may be misogyny in here. I must admit, I think I'm in the minority here. I do see a good bit of misogyny in that, you know, other people have mentioned that it's not about the woman, it's about craving is the enemy. And certainly that's true, but the only example of craving is because of women. And I think it's just very difficult for, you know, to not notice that. There's certainly many other kinds of craving that we all experience.
Also, the Buddha was a monk, and the Buddha was a male, and the founder of a sangha that was, at least the great majority were males. If the Buddha was a female, and the majority of monastics were female, but again, I don't think female sexuality works quite in the same way as males do.
But even though they're all males, they certainly have very strong cravings that are not solely due to women. And that the fact that the only images are about women, that it reminds me a lot of what other minorities talk about, that, you know, the only images you see of African Americans, it used to be in public discourse, were of servants or criminals. And so it's very hard not to relate to them in those ways as a society. So I think it's just, what's the message when women are, you know, the only thing mentioned? It's not that that's not an important, you know, you could mention one instance or two instances, but all of them have to do with women are the problem.
Yeah, but I do have to say that for the monastic life, it is the thing that leads monks to disrobe most often will be
Sure.
either raw sexual desire, or, as I said, more commonly, it's the desire to establish a sort of deeper, personal, intimate relationship with a woman.
And that makes sense. But so then a related question is, given that, then how do you help young monks learn how to interact with their female followers as well as their male followers, so that the female followers don't feel, you know, left out?
Yeah, that's a big issue. And I just have a few minutes, so. Okay, let's just put it very briefly. It's important for the monk to exercise sense restraint, not to let the senses dwell upon, especially the features of a beautiful woman. And it's through mindfulness and meditation, developing certain types of meditation, that one is able to reduce the sensual desire. Yeah, but that would almost take like a whole class in itself. And maybe we'll get a chance in the future. I have to ask people who have questions, only phrase the question very concisely, and very concisely and simply. Okay, Tian Xiong.
Yes. Good morning, Bhante. Is there any reason why Buddha has to be a male? And number two, can Tibetan monks get married?
I didn't catch the question.
Is there any reason why Buddha has to be a male? And number two, male.
Yeah.
And second, can Tibetan monks get married?
So again?
Can Tibetan?
Can Tibetan monks? Okay, first, why does the Buddha have to be a male? In the texts, the Buddhas are always depicted as males. And I think we have to see this against the backdrop of the traditional Indian culture, in which positions of authority in that culture are always taken by males. So that's the answer that I would have to give to that question. Is to my mind, it's very culturally conditioned. Okay, then the second question, can Tibetan monks get married? Strictly, a Tibetan monk who is ordained, okay, the Tibetan monks are ordained according to a variant of the same monastic code that's followed in the Theravada tradition. So Tibetan monks are, monks are always married, or at least, I'm sorry. Tibetan monks who are ordained as monks are always observing the same precept as the Theravada monk, the precept of celibacy. But there are Tibetan lamas who are qualified teachers, Dharma teachers and meditation teachers, who are not ordained as monks, who are able to get married. But it gets a bit confusing, I found, in Tibetan Buddhism, because the lamas, and these are particularly in the Nyingma school, often they'll have fairly short hair, but maybe not shaving the head, and they wear maroon robes that look a little bit like monastic robes, but if you look, there's a difference. But because the robes are the same maroon color, you might think that they are monks, and then you hear that they're married, so you think, they're married monks, but they're not actually ordained as monks. They're lamas who don't follow monastic precepts. Okay, I'll just take one, I'll only have time for one more question, then I will have to close up, and then I'll have to go up for the meal. So this will be Dan Vasquez.
Thank you, Bhante. I have a very practical question, actually. So this sutta is around sexual desire and sexual craving. What are some practical tips on how to work with that energy, right? Because I'm sure as a monk, you give instructions to young monks about how to work with that energy. Just your top 2 or 3 tips. I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, that came to mind. There's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. That's the Connected Discourses of the Buddha. It's in chapter 35. I don't remember the number offhand. It's like somewhere in the 130 mark. It's a conversation between a monk and a king, in which the king is asking the monk how the young monks are able to maintain, when they're in the flush of youth, full of vitality and life, how they manage to live the celibate life. And the monk answers in terms of 3 things. First, he speaks about the practice of the meditation on the 32 parts of the body. This is the unattractive or impure nature of the body, which I've explained on some of our retreats, mindfulness of the body retreats. So that is one method. Another method that he mentions is you try to perceive all older women as being your mothers, all younger women as being your daughters, and all women in roughly the same age group as being your sisters, just in different physical forms. And then the third method he mentions is exercising restraint over the senses, so that you're not grasping upon and dwelling upon with the mind, dwelling upon the attractive features.
Thank you, Bhante. I'm going to practice that.
Yeah, if you find the Connected Discourses, you look chapter 35, it's somewhere, I think, in the 130s, range of the 130s. Okay, we're going to have to end now. So we'll end in the usual way. We'll do the sharing of the merits. So I'll recite the verses. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang. dukkha, dukkha patajani dukkha, bhaya patajani bhaya, soka patajani soka, hantu sabepi panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus.
Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you very much.
See you again, Bhante. Enjoy the
Thank
lunch.
you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante. And a bow to Bhante. Bhante, bow to you, Bhante.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, Bhante. Have a good lunch. Be safe.
Thank you, Bhante.
Bye, Bhante.
Be well, Bhante. Have a
Bhante.
good lunch.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, there's another sutta on warriors, but I won't do that one. It's in a similar vein as this one. So next time we'll start on the Fears of the Future series of suttas, which some of them are quite interesting.
Sadhu Bhante. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante.
So keep well.
Thank you, Bhante. Keep well. Stay safe.
Thank you.
See you on
Enjoy your
Wednesday.
lunch. Bye.
Enjoy your lunch. Bye, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, let's.
Long life to you, Bhante. Thank you.